For the wedding, we're doing everything ourselves. I'm like kind of crafty and I can bake. So the wedding will be cheap, but it won't look cheap. I vow to try to not get other lovers, but try really hard. Okay, I'm joking. We haven't made any decisions on it yet, but we decided to move forward and just focus on our wedding. I just need everyone to listen and to my list and to me tomorrow. Don't be too sensitive tomorrow, because you're often too sensitive.
Well, you're often too blunt.
Okay, whatever. Just don't get butthurt for a long period of time.
The strangest thing about Josh and Catie right now is that they seem to be having two completely different relationships while standing in the exact same room. Josh is basically saying, marriage is still on the table. I'm not saying never. I'm saying later, when we can do this properly. But Catie is not hearing later. She is hearing rejection. She is hearing hesitation. And more importantly, she seems to be hearing the beginning of a breakup that Josh has not actually announced. And that is where this situation gets much more complicated than a simple argument over a wedding date. Because if Josh really sees Catie as his future wife, why does the future suddenly need to be pushed further away? Why talk about having a bigger, more public, more meaningful wedding later when the woman you supposedly want to marry is standing in front of you asking for certainty right now? But there is another side to this. What if Josh is not delaying marriage because he wants out? What if he is delaying marriage because he is finally realizing that getting married does not magically fix everything that is already going wrong? And after everything we have seen surrounding these two, the boundary problems, the arguments about commitment, Catie questioning whether monogamy will actually make her happy, and Josh repeatedly feeling blindsided, the wedding may not even be their biggest problem anymore. The real question is much more uncomfortable. Does Catie believe Josh still wants her? And does Josh believe Catie actually loves him enough to choose him? Because once both people start questioning that, a wedding date becomes almost irrelevant. On the surface, Josh's argument actually sounds reasonable. He is not necessarily saying the relationship is over. He is not necessarily saying he never wants to marry Catie. His position appears to be that if they're going to do this, he wants it to feel real, intentional, and public instead of rushed or surrounded by uncertainty. And under normal circumstances, that could actually sound romantic. Imagine someone saying, I don't want to give you some half-hearted wedding while we are emotionally falling apart. I want our families there. I want us to celebrate it openly. I want us to know what we are doing. That sounds responsible. But here's the problem. Timing changes the meaning of everything. When your relationship already feels unstable, postponing marriage does not sound like planning. It sounds like hesitation. That is what I think Catie is reacting to. Josh may be talking about logistics, timing, and doing things properly. Catie is listening for one thing only, certainty. And those are completely different conversations. Josh may genuinely believe that slowing everything down protects the relationship. From his perspective, rushing into marriage while they still have major unresolved issues could be the irresponsible choice. But from Catie's perspective, every step backward feels like evidence that Josh is emotionally preparing to leave. That difference matters because Josh might think he is saying, I care about this enough not to rush it. Catie may be hearing, I don't care about you enough to choose you. And when somebody already feels insecure, you can explain your intentions 10 different ways and still never reach them emotionally. That is why the phrase, we'll get married later, can sound hopeful to one person and devastating to another. And Catie's response becomes even more interesting when you look at the pattern surrounding this relationship. She does not seem to be evaluating only the wedding anymore. She appears to be evaluating Josh himself. Does he still look excited about her? Does he sound excited? Is he pulling back physically? Is his tone different? Is he frustrated because he is stressed, or frustrated because he secretly wants out? That is how relationship anxiety can become a detective story, where every little thing becomes evidence. A delayed wedding is evidence. A tired expression is evidence. A defensive answer is evidence. Josh needing space becomes evidence. Even reassurance can become suspicious because now the question becomes, are you saying that because you mean it, or because you don't want to hurt me? And once a relationship reaches that point, words lose a lot of their power. Catie could easily start thinking that later is just the nicer version of never. Maybe Josh does not want to break up today. Maybe he does not want a dramatic confrontation. Maybe he wants to delay everything until the relationship slowly dies on its own. I am not saying that is what Josh is doing. There is not enough evidence to treat that as fact. But I absolutely understand why Catie's mind could go there. especially because this relationship has already had serious conversations about boundaries and commitment. TLC's own Season 12 description framed Catie's behavior around kissing friends and strangers as something that pushes Josh to his limit, and the season later showed the open marriage discussion becoming another major source of conflict. So when the foundation is already unstable, asking one partner to simply trust the future becomes a much bigger request than it sounds. And this is where the story flips. Because while Catie is worrying that Josh does not want her, Josh may be sitting there wondering whether Catie has ever fully chosen him. That is the hidden contradiction making this relationship so fascinating. Catie thinks Josh is pulling away. Josh thinks Catie does not love him enough. Think about how impossible communication becomes when both people believe they are the one being rejected. Josh looks at Catie questioning him and thinks, why doesn't she trust me? Catie looks at Josh becoming defensive and thinks, why is he getting so cold with me? Josh then feels even more accused. Catie feels even less reassured. He pulls back. She pushes harder. He becomes frustrated. She becomes emotional. And suddenly both people are behaving in ways that confirm the other person's worst fear. That is the relationship loop I would be watching much more closely than the wedding itself. Because they are both basically asking the same question without saying it directly. Do you still want me? Catie asks it through questions about marriage. Josh asks it through questions about trust and loyalty. And because neither person is asking it that clearly, neither person is getting the answer they actually need. This is also why their conversations seem capable of going in circles forever. Josh can explain that postponing something is not the same as canceling it. Catie can respond that commitment without a real timeline does not feel like commitment. Josh can say, I already told you I want a future. Catie can essentially respond, then why doesn't your behavior make me feel secure about that future? And technically, both people can believe they are making perfect sense. That is what makes this kind of conflict so difficult. There does not have to be one person lying. Sometimes two people can be completely sincere and still be completely incompatible in what they need from each other. Josh seems to need trust before he can feel comfortable making the biggest commitment possible. Catie seems to need commitment before she can feel safe enough to trust the future. Read that again, because that may be their entire relationship in one sentence. Josh wants trust before marriage. Catie wants marriage to prove that the relationship is trustworthy. So, who moves first? That is where Josh's idea of a proper wedding becomes much more complicated than it sounds. On one hand, maybe he genuinely wants something better for them. Maybe he wants the wedding to happen without all this tension hanging over it. Maybe he does not want them making vows while privately wondering whether those vows mean the same thing to both people. And given Catie's previous questions about monogamy, Josh has legitimate reasons to want clarity. Public reporting on the season has described Josh as feeling blindsided when Catie raised the possibility of an open marriage. The latest story developments have also shown Catie continuing to question whether traditional monogamy will satisfy her even as the wedding approaches. That matters. Because you cannot separate Josh's hesitation from the larger trust issue. If the person you plan to marry is still openly wondering whether they can live within the relationship structure you believed you had agreed on, slowing down does not automatically make you manipulative. It might make you cautious. But there is still a suspicious interpretation of Josh's position that viewers are going to notice. An undefined future wedding is extremely convenient. Later has no deadline. Someday requires no decision today. We'll do it properly when everything is better sounds wonderful until nobody can explain what better actually means. Better financially? Better emotionally? Better communication? Better trust? 6 months? 1 year? 3 years? Because if Josh cannot define what needs to change before he feels ready, then Catie has every reason to wonder whether the goalpost could keep moving. That is why vague promises are so dangerous in reality TV relationships. The promise sounds romantic enough to calm the argument, but vague enough that it cannot really be measured. And viewers notice that. Some fans watching Catie and Josh this season have been extremely critical of Catie's boundary issues and her open marriage comments. A common reaction online has basically been, Josh has already seen enough red flags. Why is he still here? But there is another section of the audience that has started turning the question back on Josh. At what point does constantly staying become part of the dynamic? Because if Josh repeatedly tells Catie that certain behavior is unacceptable but then continues forward without meaningful consequences, Catie may eventually stop believing his boundaries are actually boundaries. A boundary without enforcement becomes a complaint. That does not excuse Catie's behavior. It means Josh has agency too. And that is one of the more interesting shifts in fan reaction. Earlier, a lot of viewers seemed to see Josh mainly as the patient partner tolerating chaos. More recent discussions include people saying they have less sympathy because he continues choosing the relationship despite clearly seeing what bothers him. That does not mean the audience suddenly thinks Josh is responsible for Catie's choices. It means viewers are beginning to ask why he keeps volunteering for a relationship dynamic he says is hurting him. And that question becomes very relevant if he is now talking about postponing marriage. Maybe this is finally the moment where Josh is attempting to create an actual consequence. Maybe he is saying, I love you, but love does not mean I have to marry you while I am still uncomfortable. If that is what he means, I actually think that is an important distinction. People sometimes treat postponing a wedding like automatic proof that the relationship is failing. Sometimes postponing a wedding is the healthiest decision available. The red flag would be postponing it indefinitely while demanding that your partner continue behaving like a spouse without giving them any clear path toward the commitment they want. Those are two very different things. And Catie's reaction could determine which direction this goes. Because insecurity has a way of turning relationships into loyalty tests. She may start asking Josh for bigger declarations. Tell me you still want this. Promise me we are getting married. Tell me exactly when. Show me you aren't planning to leave. And every time Josh fails to give the perfect answer, she could interpret it as confirmation. But Josh may experience those same questions as accusations. He could think, why am I constantly being put on trial when I'm still here? And then he becomes less affectionate because he feels pressured. Catie notices the reduced affection. Now she thinks she was right, so she pushes harder. Josh pulls back further. And congratulations, now both people have accidentally created the breakup dynamic they were supposedly trying to avoid. This is what makes their situation more serious than a regular argument. They're not just disagreeing about what should happen. They seem to be disagreeing about what the disagreement itself means. To Josh, the argument may mean, we have problems to solve. To Catie, the argument may mean, he is leaving me. Those are radically different emotional realities. And I think Josh's statement that he feels unloved is probably one of the most revealing pieces of this whole puzzle. Because if Josh feels like Catie does not really love him, then his hesitation makes much more sense. From his perspective, maybe the constant questioning is exhausting. Maybe he thinks, if you love me, why is everything I say automatically treated like a lie? Josh may connect love with trust. Catie may connect love with visible commitment. So Josh says, trust me because I love you. Catie says, prove you love me so I can trust you. Again, who goes first? And I do not think either one can win that argument by talking louder. Catie also has a difficult question to face. Is fear changing the way she treats Josh? Because somebody can genuinely love their partner and still behave in ways that make that partner feel unloved. Those two things can exist at the same time. Catie may believe she is questioning Josh because she cares so deeply about losing him. But Josh does not experience her internal intention. He experiences the accusation. That is why saying, I only act like this because I love you, does not automatically solve anything. Secure love and fearful love can look completely different from the receiving end. Secure love says, tell me what you need. Fearful love sometimes says, prove you won't leave. And if Catie cannot express the fear without turning Josh into the defendant, he is eventually going to shut down. But Josh has responsibility here too. He cannot demand trust while communicating entirely through ambiguity. If you know your partner is scared that you are leaving, and you genuinely are not planning to leave, then clarity matters. Not endless reassurance. Clarity. What exactly are you waiting for? What needs to improve? What does marriage later actually mean? Are we talking months? Are we actively planning? Is this still the relationship you want? Those are questions Josh should be able to answer if postponement is truly about strengthening the relationship. Otherwise, Catie is being asked to invest emotionally in a future she cannot see. And that is where I think the relationship could reach a breaking point without anybody screaming or throwing anything. Sometimes the most dangerous conversation is the quiet one. Josh says he cannot keep proving himself. Catie goes silent because she hears that as him giving up. Josh needs space because he is emotionally exhausted. Catie watches him walk away and thinks, there it is. I knew he wanted out. But Josh might be walking away specifically because he does not want the conversation to turn destructive. Same action. Two completely different interpretations. And if nobody corrects that interpretation, fear starts writing the story for them. That is how misunderstandings become reality. You believe someone is leaving, so you become defensive. They feel pushed away, so they create distance. You see the distance and believe you were right. Eventually, they actually do leave. Then everybody says, see? I knew it. But sometimes the fear helped create the outcome. Now, when it comes to fan reaction, Catie has obviously been taking a huge amount of heat. Many viewers have criticized her behavior around kissing other people, her approach to boundaries, and especially the later open marriage conversation. Some fans feel Josh has been asked to tolerate things that would immediately end many relationships. But I think there is a danger in turning reality TV couples into a hero and a villain too quickly. Because once the audience decides one person is the problem, everything the other person does starts getting excused. Josh can be more sympathetic in certain conflicts and still make questionable choices. Catie can behave badly in certain situations without every emotion she expresses automatically being fake. Both things can be true. And there is another important point here. Viewers should be very careful about reducing Catie's choices to a diagnosis. The show has discussed her OCD, but viewers watching edited television are not in a position to diagnose why every behavior happens. The behavior itself is enough to analyze. Were agreed boundaries respected? Was communication honest? Were expectations compatible? Those questions are much more useful than trying to turn every reality TV conflict into amateur psychology. So, where does this go from here? I think there are 3 realistic possibilities. The first is that Josh really is buying time. He may love Catie, but slowly be recognizing that love is not enough to create a stable marriage. Instead of ending everything immediately, he could keep moving the commitment further away while he decides whether he actually wants to stay. If that is what happens, Catie's fear is not completely irrational. The second possibility is almost the opposite. Josh still wants the marriage, but he needs Catie to demonstrate that she understands why he is hesitant. In that version, the postponement becomes a test of whether they can rebuild trust without using a wedding as emotional duct tape. And honestly, that would probably be healthier than rushing into marriage just because canceling or postponing feels embarrassing. The third possibility is the messiest, and because this is 90 Day Fiancé, probably the most dramatically interesting. They continue forward while solving almost nothing. They make enough compromises to survive the immediate crisis, but never actually agree on the deeper questions. What does commitment mean? What does monogamy mean? What counts as crossing a boundary? How much reassurance does Catie need? How much uncertainty can Josh tolerate? What happens the next time one of them feels rejected? Because marriage does not erase those questions. It makes them harder to avoid. And that is why I keep coming back to Josh's promise of a future wedding. It is easy to look at that promise and say, see, he still wants her. Maybe. But talking about marriage and being emotionally ready for marriage are not the same thing. At the same time, somebody actively planning an exit usually does not benefit from repeatedly describing a shared future unless they are deliberately stringing the other person along, and there is not enough evidence to confidently accuse Josh of doing that. So the promise does matter. It suggests the door is not necessarily closed. The problem is that Catie does not need an open door. She wants Josh to walk through it. And Josh seems to want proof that walking through it will not put him right back into the same trust problems they're already having. That is the deadlock. Catie needs concrete commitment to feel emotionally safe. Josh needs emotional safety before offering concrete commitment. Neither one wants to be the person who takes the risk first. And unless somebody does, this relationship could stay stuck in exactly the same argument even if the wedding happens.